Eminent domain. What is it, and how is the Texas legislature addressing it this session? We get into that and much more with a special guest. Hello and welcome to another episode of the People and Agriculture Show. I'm your host, Stephen Lloyd. The Texas legislature is in full swing and has been for a little while. Our legislature only meets every 2 years. That's definitely another topic for another day. To say they have a lot on their plate this year would be an understatement. There's COVID bills being discussed. Unlike our federal counterparts, according to our Constitution, we must pass a balanced budget. Crazy idea, I know. Add to all of that, congressional redistricting is happening as well. So there's a lot going on. Last I checked, there's almost 8,500 bills that's been introduced so far. And we're going to look at a handful of those that deal with eminent domain today. And that brings us to our guest for today, Tiffany Lashmet. She has served as an agricultural law specialist for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service since 2013, specializing in legal issues affecting Texas landowners and ag producers, much like myself. She is the author of the Texas Agriculture Law blog and host of Ag Law in the Field podcast, which I highly recommend you checking out both of those. There's be links in the show notes to go to them. They're great. On top of all of this, you can usually find her speaking all across the state at conventions and conferences, which is, by the way, where I first heard her speak on this very issue. I think back in 2016, somewhere around there at the Texas A&M Beef Cattle Short Course. And so, with all of that, Tiffany, welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, Stephen, thanks for the invitation.
Well, we'll get right into it because we have a lot to cover. Eminent domain. It's a pretty serious issue, especially with those who've had to experience firsthand. I have not, luckily, but I think it's misunderstood by a lot of people on really both sides of the issue. But I will say, prior to listening to your talk, I think a lot of people see eminent domain as like the whole uh, railroads coming to take Jesse James' land, and he's going to wage war on them. And really, is someone going to come take our land? Is that kind of the whole point of eminent domain?
Well, yes and no. So eminent domain, right? I mean, it is the ability of the government or someone who's been given the authority by the government to take private property for public use upon paying just compensation. That's sort of my spiel if you break
That's
it down
the
into its
yeah.
pieces,
That's the
right?
main deal there. Yeah.
Right. And so it's not as much like, it's not like generally they're not going to come in and like take the ranch away, right? Much more common, what you're going to see is they're going to come and take an easement to put a pipeline through the ranch or to put up a transmission line through the ranch, or they may take part of it to expand a roadway. Those are kind of the common things that we see here in Texas. And as you can imagine, as the state's population continues to grow, we need more and more infrastructure. We're seeing a lot of these projects going on. And because of the way things are set up, right, it's just going to affect a lot of rural landowners across the state.
Yeah, that's true, and it has already affected a lot of people, especially around here. And I know that the high speed rail, which we'll probably get into here after a while,
Mm-hmm.
that's another big issue, especially in Central Texas. That thing's huge. Well, really, we're going to be talking about the state legislature, Texas bills, and such like that. This is a federal and a state thing, right? It's
Yeah,
both.
that's right. Yeah. So there's the right under both the U.S. Constitution and the Texas Constitution provides for, again, private property to be taken for public use, but you have to pay fair compensation. And that's under both constitutions. And so we're going to focus today on the state takings law, right? That's what you're going to see, like I say, for most of your pipelines, most of your roads. If there were to be, for example, like the border wall that you hear some about, right? That's a federal taking, different statutes, different rules, very different process. But on the state level, there are state statutes that really govern kind of the rules, the responsibilities if eminent domain is going to be used in the state of Texas.
Okay. Well, does it supersede the state? If there's any specific state laws, does it automatically supersede it, or?
So in the context of eminent domain, it doesn't necessarily supersede, it's just two different things.
Okay.
So if it's the federal government taking land, then it's a federal taking, and that's where those rules come into play. If it's the state or someone given authority from the state, then we're looking at the state rules.
Okay. Okay. All right. So now we got kind of a broad overview of what it is. How does it work? What's the route that they go through?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on the different type of project, but in general, what's going to happen is a landowner would get like a knock on the door or a letter in the mail that says, hey, we're looking at potentially doing a project, a pipeline project, for example, right? If you've got a common carrier pipeline that contacts you and says, hey, we're looking at building a pipeline. We have developed a route that may go through your property. We are here to contact you to talk about granting us an easement. That's how it would normally start. There's one exception to that, which is if you're dealing with a transmission line, that's actually governed by the Public Utility Commission, and they've got a routing process. And so you would be contacted and there would be kind of more information there because the PUC actually chooses the route for a transmission line. Whereas if you've got a common carrier pipeline, they get to choose their own route. So there's a little nuance there. But in general, yeah, a person would get contacted and they would find out, like, look, they're wanting to get an easement across our property. They may make you an offer of here's what we'll pay, things like that. That's how the ball sort of gets rolling. Where people can really make a mistake, I think, is not being informed, right? And not knowing their rights and responsibilities in this process. Because if you look at the data, it shows that like about 70 or 75% of people accept the first offer. And I mean, you have to assume typically the first offer is not always the best offer as far as compensation or as far as terms go to protect the land. And so one thing I really try hard to do is to put information out there so people can know, like, wait a minute, you don't have to take that first offer. You've got time, right? There are statutory provisions that give you time. You can talk to an attorney or not. You should be negotiating for more money and for things that protect your land. Yeah, so like I say, I really try to make sure people are educated on those rights, because if you've never dealt with it before, you just may not know kind of how it all works and what your rights even are.
All right. There's certain things that have to happen though. I mean, it has to have a certain reason. They can't just say, okay, I'm going out, I work for this pipeline, I'm going to go for your land. There's got to be certain criteria, isn't there, that they have to meet?
So yeah, so there are steps that they would have to take, right? And like I say, I mean, it's different for every type of taking that you're looking at. For a pipeline, right, they have to go through the Texas Railroad Commission. They've got to fill out what's called a T4 form. And that form just says, we're this company, we're putting in a pipeline. Yes, we have eminent domain power, or no, we don't. If they say that they have that power, they've got to provide a little bit more information about that, some affidavits, some paperwork to sort of show that. And then once they've done that, right, and then on the back end, the company's doing a lot of work as well, right? Different environmental studies and things like that to decide what, where, how they want to do this. But those things have to kind of be done before they can just come out and decide to put in a pipeline. On the transmission line side, like I said, they actually go before the Public Utility Commission. The company will propose a bunch of different potential routes for the transmission line to take, and the PUC actually determines what route will be approved. And so then they will put theirs on that specific route.
I know, I've read some of your stuff on eminent domain. I know there's the three actual conditions that have to be met on condemnation, right? That they have to be It's public use is one of them. They have to be
Hmm. Hmm.
adequately compensated, and they actually have to
Hmm.
be a entity that can do that. All of that,
That's right.
and that's outlined in the state statutes, or is that in the Constitution, or is that in actual laws that they've put in?
So yeah, so that's in both. So
Okay,
those requirements are actually in the Texas Constitution.
okay,
The Constitution says basically your private property can't be taken except for this reason. So it's spelled out there. Then the details on that are all included in Chapter 21 of the Property Code.
okay.
And so if you're facing eminent domain, Chapter 21 sets out all the rules. I also really recommend, as far as trying to figure out what rules apply and what statutes and what the laws are, a couple of things. One of them is called the Texas Landowner Bill of Rights.
Okay.
That's a document that was put together by the Texas Attorney General's office. I tell people it's like the Bible on eminent domain.
Okay.
It's written for normal people, right? It's not a bunch of lawyer talk, but it really just explains to you like what's going on, what are your rights, what's the timeline, what are the rules. So make sure you get a copy of that, and the company during the process is required to give you one, but you can go get it online. The other thing I think is helpful is I've got a handbook that I wrote that was sponsored by Texas Farm Bureau, and it's just a landowner's guide to eminent domain. And same thing, it just tries to spell out some of that, give you some pointers, got tips on terms to negotiate for. So I think both of those are helpful to help you just understand the applicable law.
Well, that's kind of, and this is where gets it's worrisome. I get the Constitution. It's vague. I mean, it's very broad. It's got to be. It's supposed to be.
Mhm.
And but some of the statutes are also a little. They seem to be a little vague too. And I don't know if that's what uh, the Texas the legislature is trying to work on. You've looked at some of the bills that were that are in there. Is that kind of what they're trying to do with some of these bills, is kind of clear up or specify certain things so that maybe it doesn't seem as vague? Because
So I don't
for me, it just seems like uh, public use seems like a pretty vague idea, because who's to say it's for the public use? Well, if this railroad expects it to be, or this power line or this oil field thinks it's public use, well, why do they? I mean, is it up to them, or is it up to the court system, I guess, to decide whether it is or not? Is that how it works?
what I think most of them, maybe with the exception of one, what I think most of them are trying to do is um, just put more protections for landowners in the statute. So I don't know
Okay.
that they're clarifying or changing who has the right to eminent domain or what projects have the right to do that by changing like the definition of public use. But I do think what they're trying to do is to put in some requirements by statute to help protect landowners. These are things that if you hire a lawyer, you're going to get. Your lawyer's going to negotiate for. But I think, and again, I'm not in the legislature, right? But I think the goal of the bills is let's build some of these things in to where the average person who maybe doesn't go hire an attorney would be entitled to those protections by statute, not only if they negotiate for them. So I
So they're
think that's what
more.
these bills are more aimed at.
So they're more automatic kind of things. So you're not having to
That's right.
just call up a lawyer. It's like, well, we need to make sure you add this. So it's just automatically, if you're going in for eminent domain, you you start the negotiations. This is our kind of the baseline kind of sort of deal.
Yeah, I think that's how I would look at it, right? So, for example, right now, if a company comes in, they can just offer you, right? Like, here's so many dollars a rod, here's a really short easement, like, sign it, we're good. And 70% of the people do that, right? This statute would say, wait a minute, if you're going to go use eminent domain or condemnation, same thing, to get an easement, here's this list of all these terms you have to include in that easement, right? You
Okay.
can't make one without that. Again, there are
Okay.
terms you would negotiate for if you're a landowner with an attorney or who's done some homework and tried to do that, but it would just automatically make those part of the required easement.
Oh, somebody's coming up to me to do this, to say, well, we need to take this easement for this particular thing. Where can I go to make sure they're a legitimate entity, like they have the power to do this? Do I have to call
Yeah,
lawyers?
you could. There's a couple things you can do. One thing is the Texas Comptroller's Office has a online database
Okay.
of entities that have eminent domain authority. So you could certainly check there and say, like, is this an entity that's listed in that database? If it's a pipeline company, you could ask them to see the information they filed with the Railroad Commission, that
Okay.
T4 form, right? You could get information that way. If it's a transmission line, you can ask for their PUC case number. That'd be a way to do it there. Now, if it's something like text dot for a road,
Mm.
I'll save you the trouble. They have that
Yeah,
power,
they have
right?
it. Yeah.
Um, but to investigate those, that's a way to do it. You certainly can talk to an attorney, and a lot of times, there are attorneys in the state that do a lot of eminent domain work for landowners, and a lot of times they'll have landowners across the state kind of on all the different big projects, and so they may have some more background information as well.
I wanted to kind of touch on the bills, and I know
Okay.
you've kind of looked into them. The ones that I've really I think are doing the most as far as eminent domain, that is real. That's specifically what they're trying to do. Was HB 901, and then you mentioned SB 986 is a very similar. I think they're very similar
Hmm.
and basically saying the same
Hmm.
thing. And then you mentioned HB 4107. So
Hmm.
what do you know about mainly HB 901 and then HB 4107? What?
Sure. So yeah, so I think you could look at House Bill 901 and at Senate Bill 986, right? And essentially what if I was going to describe those, I would say, well, that's sort of picking up where the legislature stopped last time,
Okay.
right? And so over the past several sessions, they've been trying to get a bill through that would make some of these changes, kind of eminent domain reform, as some of the groups might call them. Those bills are sort of kind of tracking along the same track we've seen them take over the last couple of sessions. And so those are things like there are required terms that have to be in your initial offer. There are those required terms in the easements, like we talked about, right? Like you
Yeah.
have to say how wide is the easement. You have to limit it to one pipeline, those sorts of things. They both do that. So one thing I think that's new in these bills, at least I don't think I've seen it before, is Senate Bill 986 and House Bill 902 talk about creating an ombudsman office. That basically there would be somebody who they would have appointed as an I don't say that word probably right. The
Yeah.
ombudsman,
Yeah.
who basically would be there to help answer questions and help landowners going through the process.
Okay.
So I think that's an interesting provision that's a little bit different. There's some requirements about training and certification for landmen that they would have to take, or right-of-way agents would have to take. It would modify that as well. So those are kind of those three bills. A bill by Representative Burrows is a little bit different. It's House Bill 4107. It really deals with the right of a company to come on and survey if they are looking at an eminent domain project. And that's something where people can get really frustrated. I get a lot of angry phone calls from people
Yeah.
when they find out, like, look, this pipeline company wants to come through. I don't want them here. And they're telling me they have the right to survey. Under the law, if they have eminent domain power, they do have the right to come on and survey.
So it's
Now, there are
whenever they
things you
want.
can limit,
So basically,
not necessarily
whenever.
whenever they want.
Okay.
No, no, no. They've
Okay.
got the right to come on and survey, but there are limits that can be imposed that the law has set out.
Okay.
What we tell people is you need to have what's called a right of entry permit that spells out what they can and can't do. This bill by Representative Burrows basically would take the checklist that I give people up to write one of these permits, put that in the statute, and say, if you're going to come on and survey, you have to have all these terms in here to be included as part of your permits. It also would make the company negotiate the route of a pipeline. They would have to negotiate that with the landowner, and that would be something very different as well. So that bill's a little bit different as far as the other three. Interesting concept, I think, and something that sure landowners deal with for sure.
Well, and from what I understand, they, at least I know HB 901. I'm not sure about the House Bill 4107, but none of them's gotten out of committee yet. They've been read in committee, but that's similar to what's happened with the last session, though, right? They got into committee, but nothing really continued on, right? It just kind of stopped in the
Yeah.
committee.
So 901 and 4107 both had public hearings in the committee, but then no action was taken. The Senate bill was referred to the Senate State Affairs Committee, but nothing's happened there. Last session, they actually did get a bill through the Senate. Representative Colcourt's bill got through the Senate last time, but then wasn't able to get through the House. So, but as far as that goes, no, none of these bills have made it out of committee at this point. And, I mean, we're recording at the end of April, and
April,
so
don't
time's getting short.
yeah,
Time's
and
getting short here. So,
I don't expect them to really make much progress on it just because of what I said earlier. They got a lot to do this year. And, I know I fully expect them to be in session for probably through June or July. I figure the governor will do the special sessions. I don't see how he couldn't. I mean, they're not even going to get the information for redistricting probably until May or something like that. So I just I don't see how they're going to make much progress on this. I think it's going to get pushed aside as not as important right now.
yeah, and talking to some of the folks I know that work down in Austin, I mean, I think the session started off a little bit slow with all the COVID restrictions and people couldn't be there. And so I think that
Yeah.
put them a little bit behind. And I know everything's kind of a frenzy now trying to get stuff through. So we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah. That kind of gives us a pretty good overview of eminent domain and some of the bills that, because it is a complicated issue. It does, and a lot of people, I don't think fully understand it, and they have to. It keeps you in business, that's for sure. With a lot of the attorney work, I think that kind of keeps attorneys in business. But uh, I appreciate you explaining all of that, because that it it's a good place to start. Now, things are constantly changing, and so in a month, this conversation could be completely different as opposed to what we're trying to figure out on eminent domain. I mean, especially if they pass anything. Uh, so I appreciate talking about that. Um, we're gonna, don't mind, since we got enough time here, to kind of just completely turn and do something completely different as opposed to eminent domain. As I mentioned earlier, you have your blog and the podcast, which I've listened to, and they're fantastic. And I've just started one. And so I wanted to ask you what you see as necessary. I don't know if it'd be necessary, but for people in farming, ranching, agriculture, period, is there a need for more presence? I guess it would be in whether it's social media or YouTube or whatever. Is there a need for it at all?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that when we look at the way the world is now, right? Everybody's on their phone all the time. Everybody's on the internet. So I think anytime we can be, a place where people are, that's a really good thing. And so whether that's social media or a podcast or blogs or anything like that, I think that that's just a good place to be. I mean, I do some work with some high kids, 4-H and FFA, and I always tell them, like, listen, we need people who are farming and ranching. Obviously, we know that, but I also think that we really need people with farming and ranching backgrounds in other places, right? So I always tell them we need them in courtrooms and boardrooms and, in the legislature, because if we're only talking to ourselves, that's not really doing us any good, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
And so I really think that anybody who wants to, get out there and really talk about agriculture and the issues that we face and even just what we're doing, I think is really important.
Well, I know. I'm not sure what generation we are. Generation Z, millennial, whatever. I can't keep
Right.
up with where it stops at. I think I'm on the edge of one, but uh,
Hmm.
a lot of the younger generation, and I've mentioned this in my first podcast episode, was that the average, the age of farmers and ranchers now is, I think, 58. I mean, it may be higher than that now,
Hmm.
but it's getting on up there. And that generation isn't as active, I guess would say, on this kind of stuff. But the younger generation is. This is where they go. And I know we sell bulls. Well, a lot of them are looking at online for the information. They're not, some of them will come out to the sale and do it by visual, but they're looking at numbers and data, and it kind of is the way that generation works. And so I think we need to meet them at that point somehow. And obviously, this is one way, and you know,
Mhm.
we're probably not going to get on TikTok or any of that and do the crazy dances and all that stuff. I don't know much about that one. I'm not on it. So, but
Mhm.
I think this is a way we can at least get the stories out there. And you mentioned that earlier when we were talking before, that there are stories to be told in
Mhm.
agriculture, and I think this is a way to do it. And you even do that on in your podcast. You have it's based on the law, but it's based on the law with stories added into it, and I think that's where we need to go. But how do we convince the older generation to get involved, or at least allow the kids and whatever to continue it, to try to put that stuff out there? Is there a way to convince them, or
Yeah.
just
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that you kind of have to know who you're working with, right? So, I mean, for example, I have my dad come on my podcast, and I guarantee you, like, if you would have told my dad 10 years ago he'd be on a podcast, he would have been like, I don't know what that is, and you're an idiot, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so I think it's one of those things that we just have to help get them more familiar with it and maybe let them see what it can do. So I mean, I'm like you, my family raises show lambs. We've had in-person show lamb sales for decades. We've shifted now, and now we have a lot of online sales. And look, if we had our choice, we'd sell them off the farm. We
yeah,
like that better.
absolutely.
Taking pictures and videos is awful. I mean, we'd rather do it the other way, but that's just not how is the best, from a business standpoint. And so I think that part of it is, from a business standpoint, we really have to think about these things. And I think that's one way to get people to kind of pay some attention is look at the numbers, right? We have to make some changes. I think another thing is it may be that, grandpa's not ever going to embrace some of this and he's going to think that it's dumb and he's not going to do it. This is somewhere I think I can help us. Let me try it. And so I think that there's something to be said there too. Like, let's not beat grandpa into submission and make him do a podcast, right?
Yeah.
But let's convince him that maybe there's some value in me doing one.
Mm. Well, and also they operated on relationships. That's how, a lot of
Right.
these farms and ranches, it was relationships. And obviously, coming out to the farm or the ranch, that's the key way to get the relationship. Well, you know relationships are built a lot differently now, and not that it's
Hmm.
bad, it's just
Hmm.
different. And so
Different.
I think, maybe we just need to still try to get them out. We
Hmm.
still need them on the ground, on the farms and ranch. I think that's where people really see what's going on. But also, I think video, interviewing people, that's maybe the best that some people are ever going to get, is to see it that in that light, because there's a lot of people that's never touched foot on a farm and ranch, or ever will, for that matter.
Right. And they just don't know. And that's one thing that I can get a little soapboxy about. I'll try to spare you, but I think we've got to be a little bit careful. I think as agriculture, sometimes I think we act like people who don't have our way of life or didn't grow up like we did are dumb, right? Like they're unintelligent because, oh my gosh, they don't know the difference between a heifer and a steer.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know the difference between the L train and the F train in New York City, but that
Yeah,
doesn't make me dumb,
yeah,
right? It just makes me different. And so I think we have to be careful a little bit with our approach and our posture to people who just grew up differently. And if we can do a better job of like, hey, let's communicate with them and like, no, you're not stupid. That's a really good question. You wouldn't know that. Let me help explain this to you. I mean, I think about some of the stuff on like food labeling and organic, not organic, GMO, not GMO. I saw water labeled gluten free the other day. Of course, water is gluten free.
yes, yeah,
I know that, right? But the woman in New York might not. And so
Yeah.
that's where I think if we can take the posture of, hey, you know things I don't know, I know things you don't know. What if we work together and like find some common ground and we can help each other know more? I think we're going to be a lot better off than, yelling at people on street corners about how dumb they are that they don't understand our industry. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And that kind of goes, I guess, and it's we even have that sort of conflict even within the ag industry, not just with
mhm,
people that's not even clueless with anything, but we have that
mhm,
conflict with all that fake meat stuff and beef. That's a
mhm,
we may not know everything about either issue. One side's all one side and one's on the other, and we've got to find a way to have that. I don't know if it'd be completely middle ground, but at least to have the discussion. And
yeah.
this may be the best way we can do it. It may be the only way we can do it is if we get on a podcast and interview somebody that's what they've done or whatever. It
Mhm.
may be our only option.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think that being able to have a discussion with somebody who we disagree with or we have different opinions than is, I mean, it's an art that maybe we've lost that we better find again. I think the other thing, right, is I think ag better quit throwing stones at each other because I mean, right, I think as the industry as a whole, I think there are a lot of issues that are facing ag from the outside, quote unquote, right? We better not be creating issues on the inside too. I mean, I think that's something that we better figure out as an industry. That'd be really important.
Yeah, and we can't fight the battle on two fronts. It's one of those things
Mhm.
we've got to be able to be united at least to promote agriculture, and that's what we're both trying to do. And so, okay, with that, I got a short little bit amount of time. I sent you a couple questions beforehand
Yes.
that were
Mhm.
completely unrelated, and
Mhm.
and I'll be honest, when I started this podcast, and it kind of goes back to stuff we were talking about earlier. I did it selfish for completely selfish reasons. Uh, I think it'll eventually turn into other reasons, but I'm a learner by nature. I learn things. I
Mhm.
like to talk to people to learn what they know and hopefully learn a little bit along the lines. Well, so that's the reason I did this. And hopefully by me doing this, other people can kind of come along with me. Well, uh, we both work pretty hard. We have a very busy schedule. Both of us do, and it's just part of the nature. It's just life, I guess. So the questions I'd like to ask is what is the escape, because it can be kind of overwhelming at times. For me, I like doing leather work. I like doing woodwork. Kind of my little escape sort of deal. What would be yours that's your kind of escape that's outside of ag or law or whatever?
Yeah, I'll give you 2. So, I think kind of on the day to day, I'm a runner. And so it's one of those things my husband will tell you I am a better person when I get to go on a run. It's a stress reliever for me. It's a little bit like therapy for me. Just getting to get some of that out. So running for sure is my like day to day kind of way to get out of it. Go do that, come back in, and I'm a much happier wife and mother. The other thing I love to do, and I'm itching to go again after 2020, is I'm a big traveler, and so I love getting to travel. I've kind of been all over the world, and it's great. And so I'm looking forward to being able to like load up my kids and hop on a plane and go do something fun again. Now that we're hopefully coming to the kind of end of the
Tail end.
pandemic.
Yeah, tail end of
Hmm.
the pandemic. Yeah, my wife and I also like to travel a lot, and that's another reason why I want to do this, to tell the stories. I'd like
Hmm.
to go to those places and see them. Hopefully that's going to be a deal. Instead of having Zoom meetings, I can actually go and have a conversation in
Right.
person. Would be nice.
Hmm. Hmm.
Eventually. And running, that mine would be walking, I guess. If I tried to
Uh-huh.
run, I wouldn't make it very far. So
Yeah.
that's just the
Yeah.
way
It's
it is.
I started running maybe, I don't know, it's probably been 12 or 13 years ago now, and I just love it. So,
Okay. Okay, the final thing, and this more is goes back to my background
Mhm.
and a lot of people's background, especially that's in agriculture. We've had an opportunity to sit and talk with our grandparents, which in today's generation, I don't know if they had time or because they're always on their phone or whatever. So they don't have that one-on-one conversation with an elder, whether it's grandparents, parents, just the neighbor or whatever. And I think we're missing that. And I called it old-fashioned talks because we used to sit around with my grandparents, play dominoes,
Mhm.
and garnered so much information just from playing dominoes. Learned a lot of profane words also playing dominoes, but it's just part of growing up. But so my question is, um, did you have the opportunity, for one, to sit down and have those kind of talks? And I still do, maybe. And is there any advice or a story that you garnered from those talks that maybe you didn't quite catch on until you got older and more into life?
Yeah, I did. I mean, we were super lucky. My brother and I grew up on my family farm in New Mexico, and my grandma lived next door. And so, I
Nice.
mean, it was like sort of like having, another parent, except she was a fun grandma. But we would walk. We were back and forth, and basically lived in two houses. And so we got to spend a lot of time with my grandma, and I think, was one of the biggest influences on my life because of that. Um, and so that's just something. I mean, it was a great way to grow up. When I think about like one story or kind of one maybe piece of advice or something that I got when I was a teenager, we showed livestock and did 4-H and FFA and stuff. And my dad would always talk about crunch time. And so 4th of July hit, crunch time would start. And that meant don't ask to go anywhere. You're not going to the movies. You're not going to town. You're not going to get a Coke. Like, it is crunch time, like our county fair is in a month, you know what I mean? And so my dad one night, I remember him saying, like, listen, here, the deal is this, like, we may get beat, but we're never going to get outworked. And so I think that really stuck with me. And when I look at my life, I really think that I have tried to take that with me, right? Like, I may not always be the best at something, but nobody's going to work harder than me. And I think that I have really kind of latched onto that. And as I've gotten older, I think I've seen the importance in that and the real value that that work ethic that we sort of learned at crunch time at the barn really gave to myself and my brother.
That's a great story, and I think that's important that some people don't even get to hear that, and maybe somebody will hear that story and it's like that really connects with with you. So I appreciate that. That brings us to the end of what we want to talk about today. Uh, Tiffany, thank you for joining me. I hope we can have another conversation on another topic another day. And and also thank everyone for joining me on this next episode of People in Agriculture. Please subscribe, share, and I look forward to speaking to all of you again. And thank you, Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you so much.